My name is Margaret, and I'm 63 years old. I used to be a television chef back in the 90s when people still sent handwritten letters asking for recipes. These days, I live in Savannah, Georgia, though calling it living didn't feel quite right the night I found myself standing outside a budget motel, clutching a suitcase with everything I had left. It was just past 9, and the air was thick, heavy enough to stick to my skin, though I barely noticed. What I did notice was the way my hands shook, fingers curled so tight around the handle that my knuckles ached. I remember thinking how strange it was that after everything I'd cooked, after everything I'd built, it all came down to this one bag of clothes and a room I hadn't chosen. I can still see the motel sign buzzing overhead, the H half lit, the parking lot empty, except for a few cars that looked just as tired as I felt. I stood there longer than I probably should have, staring at the ground like it might open up and swallow me whole. In the back of my mind, I kept hearing my daughter's voice, the way she told me there wasn't room for me anymore. The words didn't hurt as much as how calm she'd been saying them, like she'd practiced. When the desk clerk handed me the key, I smiled. That's what you do when you've been taught to keep your head high. But inside, something was cracking. I walked to the room slowly, every step feeling heavier than the one before, and told myself I'd figure it out tomorrow. Tonight, all I could do was sit on the edge of that motel bed and wonder how a person could give so much and still end up here. It's hard to explain how a story like this begins. I guess you could say it started the day I held Amanda for the first time, just after they told me my husband wouldn't be coming home. She was barely 6 pounds with a head of dark hair and a cry so sharp it made my heart ache. I promised her right there in that hospital room that I'd take care of her no matter what it cost me. The early years weren't easy. I worked double shifts at the diner, then picked up part-time catering jobs on weekends just to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. I learned how to stretch a dollar farther than I thought possible and how to smile through a kind of tired that went bone deep. I skipped doctor's appointments. I never bought myself new shoes, but Amanda never noticed because she always had what she needed. She loved the kitchen even as a little girl. She'd sit on the counter, swinging her legs, asking why I used butter instead of oil, or if sugar really made cookies soft. I'd let her taste the batter, and she'd close her eyes like she was on some cooking show of her own. Those are still some of my favorite memories. We didn't have much, but it felt like enough back then. When she got older, I saved every extra penny for her college fund. I took on extra weddings and birthday parties, sometimes staying up all night to bake 3-tier cakes in our tiny oven. By the time she walked across that stage, I was the proudest mother there. She hugged me tight and whispered that she'd never forget everything I'd done. And for a while, I believed her. After she married Chad, they asked if they could move in with me for a little while. They'd both been laid off, and rent was sky high. I didn't think twice. That house was mine, paid off after decades of scrubbing floors and skipping vacations, and I told them it was big enough for all of us. They moved into the upstairs rooms, and for a little while, it felt like having family around again. The first few months were fine. Amanda helped with groceries, Chad mowed the lawn, and every Sunday we'd eat dinner together around the old oak table. But little by little things started to change. Amanda stopped joining me in the kitchen. She'd sit in the living room glued to her phone while Chad rolled his eyes whenever I spoke. They stopped saying thank you, stopped asking how my day was, and I started feeling like a stranger in my own home. I told myself it was just stress. They were young, trying to get back on their feet, and I needed to be patient. But patience only stretches so far. I'd wake up to find they'd hosted their friends late into the night, leaving dirty dishes piled high and the smell of beer clinging to the curtains. Amanda would laugh it off and say, I worried too much, but that laugh didn't sound like hers anymore. Sometimes I'd catch Chad looking at me like I was nothing more than dead weight. He'd make little comments under his breath about how much space I took up or how he couldn't wait until Amanda had her own place so they could finally have their life back. And Amanda never told him to stop. She'd just look away like she didn't hear. I don't know when exactly the gratitude ran out. Maybe it was never really there. But what I do know is that the girl who used to bring me flowers from the yard and begged to lick the spoon was gone. In her place stood a woman who walked past me without so much as a nod, who closed the door to her room and left me standing in the hallway, wondering how much longer I could keep pretending it didn't hurt. Every night, I'd lie awake listening to them talk about their future, their plans to travel to buy a bigger house to start a family of their own. And I'd stare at the ceiling thinking about how much of my life I'd already given up to make sure Amanda never had to go without. Funny how quickly people forget where they came from when they think they're moving up in the world. Sometimes I'd hear them laugh behind closed doors, and it sounded like they were laughing at me. I'd stand in the kitchen staring at the photographs on the wall, trying to remember how it felt when the house was full of warmth and love instead of cold silence. And I'd wonder how it could be possible to feel so alone in a home I built with my own hands. It didn't happen all at once. That's what people never understand about this kind of hurt. It comes in little cuts so small, at first you almost convince yourself they don't matter. The first year they lived here, Amanda still made an effort. She'd ask if I wanted to join them at the movies or sit with her while she painted her nails. But then she stopped asking. They'd slip out of the house on a Friday night dressed up for dinner, and I'd be left sitting at the kitchen table with a reheated plate of spaghetti, pretending I'd chosen to stay home. My birthday came and went without so much as a card. I sat through dinner that night, listening to them talk about a new vacation they were planning while my cake sat untouched on the counter. Amanda noticed it eventually and said she'd have a slice later, but she never did. I stayed up late just to throw it away before bed, the frosting smudged and bitter on my hands. Then came the holidays. Every year before that, Amanda would help me set the table and arrange the centerpiece. That year, she told me they'd already made plans with Chad's family and wouldn't be around. She said it like it was nothing. I nodded and kept my smile, but I ate Christmas dinner alone. After that, it was easier to see how they'd stopped seeing me. They stopped knocking when they wanted something and started shouting my name from the bottom of the stairs. They stopped saying thank you when I did the laundry or left dinner warming in the oven. And sometimes I'd catch Chad staring at me from across the room with this look that made me feel like I'd overstayed my welcome in my own home. He started saying things louder too, like he wanted me to hear. He'd talk about how expensive groceries were getting and how I didn't eat much, but somehow still managed to cost them more. He called me a mouth to feed one morning as he poured himself coffee. Amanda didn't say a word. She just kept scrolling through her phone. I told myself it was just stress, just words said in a bad mood, but the words kept coming. He'd complain about my old chair taking up space in the living room or how my framed pictures didn't fit the style he and Amanda were going for. I came home one afternoon to find all my cookbooks packed in boxes in the garage. Amanda said they made the shelves look cluttered. I started noticing how much quieter the house felt even when they were home. They'd sit in the living room together, heads bent toward each other, whispering and laughing. Then when I walked in, the room would fall silent. They wouldn't even look at me. It got worse the night Chad didn't bother to lower his voice at all. I'd just come in from watering the garden when he stood in the doorway and told me maybe I'd lived long enough. He smiled like it was a joke, but there was nothing funny in his eyes. I froze dirt, still clinging to my gloves, and Amanda just stood there next to him. She didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. Later that week, she sat me down in the kitchen and told me she'd been looking at nursing homes. She said they'd found one not too far from town, clean and quiet. She said she thought I'd be more comfortable there since they needed more space. I stared at her and couldn't recognize the little girl I raised. I couldn't believe this was the same person who used to sit on my lap and cry into my shoulder. Her words didn't come out cold exactly. That would have been easier somehow. No, they came out practiced polite like she'd rehearsed them. I nodded and told her I'd think about it. But inside something was breaking. Not just from what they said, but from what they didn't say. From how easy it seemed for them to plan a life without me. After that, every room in the house started to feel smaller. I'd walk into the kitchen and find my favorite mugs replaced with sleek white ones Amanda had bought. My chair disappeared from the corner. My quilt was folded into a box. It was like piece by piece they were erasing me. I stopped cooking big meals. I stopped leaving the light on in the hall for them when they stayed out late. I stopped hoping Amanda would sit with me, tell me about her day. Because every little cut, every little silence was telling me she didn't see me as her mother anymore. She saw me as something in her way. And the worst part was realizing how long I'd been letting them push me aside without even fighting back. The house I built, the love I gave, the life I gave up so she could have more. None of it seemed to mean anything to them now. The anger didn't come all at once either. It simmered low and quiet under all the hurt. And every time I heard Chad call me a burden, every time Amanda pretended she didn't hear it simmered just a little hotter. That night started like any other. I was washing up the last few dishes when Emily slipped into the kitchen so quietly I almost didn't hear her. She stood there for a moment, eyes wide, hands wringing at the hem of her sweater like she didn't know how to say what she needed to say. She waited until the water stopped running and then leaned close, her little voice barely louder than a breath. She told me her parents were planning to sell the house. She said they were talking about having a doctor come look at me to write something down, something that would make it easier for them to take over. I froze dish still in my hand, the soap sliding down my wrist. I wanted to tell her she must have misunderstood. But when I looked at her face, I knew she hadn't. There was something in her eyes, some kind of shame for even being the one to tell me, and that hurt worse than the words themselves. Later, long after Emily had gone back upstairs, I stood in the dark hallway outside their bedroom. The door was cracked just enough for me to hear. Chad was saying it was almost done, that all it would take was one more little slip on my part, and the doctor would sign off. Amanda's voice followed cold and clipped, saying they needed it done before they listed the house so it wouldn't get messy. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes. The words settled into me like stones, heavy and sharp. I had never heard her speak like that before, like my existence was just a problem to be solved. I stayed there until they turned out the light. My legs felt weak, but my heart was hammering hard and fast. By the time I got back to my room, I couldn't tell if it was anger or fear running through me. The next day, Emily found me in the garden, kneeling by the rosemary bush that had gone wild. She didn't say anything at first. She just slipped a manila folder into my hands and looked away. I opened it slowly, afraid of what I'd find though. Part of me already knew. Inside were papers with my name scribbled on them, my signature forged in a hand that didn't even try to look like mine. There were emails, printed out conversations between Amanda and a realtor, even a draft listing for the house with a price already set. The longer I looked at the pages, the more the garden around me seemed to fade. My hands trembled, but I didn't let go. Each line I read felt like another crack opening up inside me. I wanted to cry, but nothing came. Instead, I folded the papers back into the folder and set it on my lap. The hurt was still there, but something else had started to take its place. A quiet kind of steel settled into my chest, thin and sharp. Emily stood beside me, waiting, her little fingers curling into mine. I gave her hand a squeeze and whispered that it was all right. But inside, I made myself a promise. Whatever they thought of me, whatever they planned, they were about to find out I wasn't done yet. The morning after Emily handed me the folder, I woke before sunrise and dressed in silence. The house was still and heavy, but inside me something had shifted. I tucked the folder into my purse and drove downtown to the bank where my mother once kept her accounts. The woman behind the counter remembered me and smiled like nothing was wrong. I told her I needed to review some documents connected to a trust my mother had mentioned years ago. She disappeared for a few minutes, then came back holding a slim file with my name typed neatly across the top. I sat in a quiet corner of the bank, flipping through pages I'd never seen before. My mother had set aside more than I ever dreamed enough to buy the house outright a dozen times over. My hands didn't shake this time. The numbers didn't scare me. They settled into me like a quiet assurance that I was not as powerless as they thought. On my way out, I stopped by a lawyer's office I'd used once years ago to update my will. She listened as I explained what Amanda and Chad were doing. Her face never changed, but her pen moved fast, writing down names, dates, details. She told me not to worry. I told her I wasn't worried anymore. For the first time in months, I felt steady. I wasn't angry the way I thought I'd be. I was just ready. Ready to protect what was mine. Ready to show them they'd underestimated the wrong woman. When I got home that afternoon, I didn't say a word. Amanda handed me another stack of papers to sign, and I took them without flinching. I didn't even ask what they were this time. I just signed my name and watched her smile like she'd already won. I started packing that night while they were out. I didn't bother taking much. Just the quilt my mother made, my good knives, and a few photographs I couldn't bear to leave behind. Everything else I left sitting neatly in its place. The next morning, I told them I was moving into a small studio apartment across town. Amanda feigned surprise, but I saw the relief flash in her eyes before she could hide it. Chad barely even looked up from his coffee. I let them think they'd broken me. I let them believe I was finally out of their way. I carried my boxes out to the car with a calm smile and waved goodbye to the only home I'd ever known. But as I closed the car door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Triumph. Not loud or obvious, but quiet and certain. Because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of mine. I waited exactly 1 week before going back. The morning air was cool and sharp as I pulled into the driveway, my lawyer stepping out of his car just behind me. Amanda and Chad were sitting on the porch when we walked up, and the way Amanda's smile faded when she saw me told me she already knew something was wrong. I didn't bother sitting. I stood at the bottom of the steps and handed my lawyer the papers. He cleared his throat and explained in that professional tone of his that the house had been sold earlier that week. The title was now in my name. Amanda blinked like she hadn't heard him right. Chad laughed loud and nervous and asked if this was some kind of joke. I didn't answer him. I just looked straight at Amanda and waited. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then finally stood up, her hands curling into fists at her sides. They argued, of course. Chad demanded to see proof. Amanda accused me of lying. My lawyer stayed calm, handing them a clean copy of the deed with my name printed at the top. The silence that followed was thicker than anything I'd felt in that house before. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't gloat. I just let the truth settle between us, heavy and undeniable. That was my house again. And no matter what they thought of me, there was nothing they could do about it now. Chad started pacing, muttering about calling someone, but even he knew it was over. Amanda just stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. For the first time in months, I stood there on my porch and felt tall again. After a long moment, I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a brand new lease, 3 times the amount they'd been paying. I handed it to Amanda and watched her eyes dart across the page as the numbers sank in. She looked up at me, her face pale, her lips trembling. Chad snatched the paper from her and glared at me like I'd done something unforgivable. I tilted my head calm as ever and let the words come out smooth and steady. Let's see how you like paying rent to a mouth you couldn't feed. The silence that followed was perfect. Amanda's shoulders sagged. Chad looked away. I turned to leave, the weight finally gone from my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. What I did wasn't about getting even or teaching anyone a lesson. It was about taking back what was mine and remembering that my life, my space, and my dignity still mattered. For so long, I let myself believe that staying quiet was the same as being kind. I thought letting things go would keep the peace. But all it really did was teach the people around me that I didn't need to be seen. The day I walked back into that house, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt ready. Ready to stop letting other people decide where I belonged. Ready to take up space again in my own story. If there's one thing I hope you take from this, it's that you don't have to scream to be strong. You don't have to fight loud or ugly to stand up for yourself. You just have to decide you're worth more than the way they've been treating you. No one gets to erase you. Not your family, not the people who think they know what's best, not even the voices in your own head telling you it's easier to just stay quiet. You deserve to take up room. You deserve to feel proud of the life you've lived. I didn't do what I did to hurt Amanda. I did it to remind myself who I was before all the silence settled in. And in the end, that was enough. So if you're sitting there tonight feeling small, feeling forgotten, I want you to remember this. You can still choose yourself. Quietly. Firmly. And that choice can change everything.